Hey everybody, I'm joined here today by Gianna Medina. Gianna and I connected on LinkedIn. We've actually been connected for probably about 6 months now. And
Yeah.
she's kind of walked me through her story from going to PT school. Her dream was to become a PT and then transitioning into the medical device, pharmaceutical sales side of things. And I just wanted to share her story for anyone who's thinking about going into PT school, is graduating, or recently has graduated, and have her kind of share her thoughts and ideas. So Gianna, thank you for joining me today. And
Yeah.
I'll kind of start with, kind of walk me through your backstory, what got you to where you are now, just to share with everyone so they get a better understanding of who you are and what your journey's been like.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this space to really share my story. So, first and foremost, I went to physical therapy school for about 20 months. I was in an accelerated program. And really, why I wanted to be a PT is because I love helping people. I love anatomy. I love the human body. I'm very good when it comes to conversations. So, for me, it just made sense. I grew up as an athlete and I'd actually had my first physical therapy internship when I was 13 years old. This was
Wow.
a dream that I had been pursuing for over 10 years. And I finally got to physical therapy school fresh out of undergrad, directly into PT school as a 21-year-old. And man, there are so many things that I wish I knew in that space. During my time in PT school, I came to a point where I was in a very unique situation, and there were a lot of different things going on, a lot of moving parts where I was questioning, does this make sense? Does it make sense to continue on? My mom had immediate brain surgery during my time. Life is still happening when you're in physical therapy school. And it was a point, like a major stop point of, do I continue on and pull out another $100,000 for PT school? Or have I ever considered anything else? I kind of had all of my eggs in one basket. A
Yeah.
lot of people, when I just say, oh, I dropped out of physical therapy school, they're like, wow, this girl's dumb. She went 80% of the way through physical therapy school, just needed to go through rotations and a few more didactic courses. But really, they don't know my situation. They don't know the financial aspect of it. And that is what it is. So for me, I call myself brave because to be able to be at that stop point and go, okay, I didn't know these things before I got to physical therapy school. I didn't see how they were going to impact my life after physical therapy school. What else am I good at? So at that crossroad, I'm like, well, I have all this medical knowledge. I'm good at talking to people. And I don't want to go back to school to pull out any more student loans, but I still want to live a fulfilling life. What can I do?
Yeah.
And really, medical sales as a whole was something that stuck out to me. I didn't know about this profession prior to physical therapy school, prior to undergrad, because I had based my undergrad degree off of going to physical therapy school. What's going to make me, stand out and look, my best option into getting into PT school, because that in and of itself is very difficult.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to that process. And medical sales just made sense. So I spent my first year working in durable medical equipment. I'm now in the pharmaceutical space, and this is a profession that I can see myself staying in for the next 20 to 30 years, retiring in this space. I love it so much. And I think in my retired life, I will be an anatomy professor.
Okay. Well, you got your plan right there. That's
Yeah.
great.
And I say that, but your plan, I mean, plans change all the
Oh
time,
yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
my journey has definitely grounded me into being very open-minded because, as I said before in the beginning of this conversation, I was very zoned into physical therapy. And
Mhm.
you kind of have to be. You have to be,
Yeah.
especially in school.
Yeah, and you said something that I want to kind of touch on was that you were an athlete growing up, and I think that I was an athlete as well. That's kind of why I've gravitated towards this space. Did you ever have an injury as an athlete that led you to this to go through that PT experience, or was it just athletes get hurt? I can help athletes. Like what was it? One of those two things, or kind of tell me a little
Yeah.
bit more about that.
So I had multiple injuries. If I were to sit here and tell you every single injury, we would be here for the next 5 hours.
Yeah.
I found myself in physical therapy at least twice a year from the age of 12 up until I was 17 years
Oh my
old, whether
gosh.
it was concussion based, whether it was I was having knee problems, I was doing hurdles, I was running track. I had a lot going on, and it was sometime in high school, again, 12, 13 years old. My professor, my high school teacher had said, start thinking about what you want to do for the rest of your life. And I knew that I wanted to be in the medical world, but I was like, oh, couldn't be a nurse. I don't really like blood. And that's changed
Yeah.
drastically since just being in PT school when he hit the cadaver lab. But I really started to think about, what do I want to do? I had a PT appointment that day. And I was kind of thinking about, what did we talk about today in school? And I remember I just like looked at my PT and I was like, do you love your job? And she just laughed at me and she was like, yeah, I do love my job. And I was like, tell me more, what did you do to become a PT? So that's when the wheels really started to
Yeah.
turn. I figured out what do I have to do? Volunteer, shadowing, what should I be looking for in a college? Those wheels started to turn. And I was like, you know what? This is a space where I can work with athletes. This is a space where I can share that desire for learning and anatomy with another human being and being able to educate them on their body, functional movement. It made sense. There's no doubt that I have passion for the field. I still have passion and love for the
Yeah.
field. We need PT. The direction that the field has gone in recent years, I think is something that me as a little 13-year-old, I wasn't thinking about. There
Yeah.
was a lot that I didn't know. I didn't know a lot about the background. When PT used to be a bachelor degree, then it went to a master's. Now it's a doctorate. The
Yeah.
pay never increased with the doctorate. There's a lot of things that I didn't take into consideration. Documentation is another thing. In PT school, I was like, man, this is a very time consuming, and you
Yeah.
have to sit there and argue with insurance companies about your worth and your treatment plan just to hope that they reimburse you what you think you're worth, right?
Mhm.
So you're not thinking about all of those things initially. And just getting back to your question, I really just loved this space of being active, influencing others to be active, educating anatomy, and being in the community. You're serving your community when you're seeing people come through the door and they're coming in injured and they're in pain, and you're able to kind of walk them through a treatment plan that's going to improve their life. So that's what's really beautiful about physical therapy. I think that it is a bit more of a holistic approach. Like, hey, before we try painkillers, let's see if we can just figure things out. It's
Yeah.
a lot of patient education. So that's what I really attracted me to the field of physical therapy. It is really such a beautiful and selfless field.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. Most of the PTs I talk to feel the same way. They're like, unfortunately, if money wasn't an issue, they probably would never leave. Because they love it so much because it's very rewarding. But like you said, it went from bachelor's to master's to doctorate. They didn't go from 100 to 200 to 300,000 in pay. Who knows what the industry will look like 10 years from now.
Right.
They're definitely.
Never say never.
Exactly, exactly. And now I want to kind of take it to the school part of things and what your not experience was, but more so of like I'm in finance. I do financial planning for the PT space, and other people as well. But I have a vast amount of knowledge for financial literacy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we had talked previously, but I want everyone to kind of hear it and be able to relate to it, whether you're thinking about going to PT school, you're in it, or you've left and you can relate to this. But you know, how many courses were taught? They're telling you to take on hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. You're spending hours upon hours, learning about the human body, how to treat, clinicals, all that type of stuff. How many classes did you personally have on, hey, here's how to, budget, or here's how to write a check, or, here's how taxes are done, or here's how you should pay off your student loans in the different scenarios. Did you have any of that?
No, I
Okay.
had zero awareness, knowledge. It was a very taboo topic in physical therapy school. I showed up to physical therapy school. I'm a very open person, I'm very transparent. And I'm looking around like, so what are you guys doing? How are you budgeting? And what I really found out is that everyone has a different situation. Your situation is very different from your peers.
Yeah.
Maybe they have support from their parents. Maybe someone in their family is a financial advisor. Maybe they are taking on a massive loan. I had to take out a loan. None of my parents went to school. All of my brothers went to the Marine Corps. I have one brother who went to college. So for me, it was just kind of finding out this information on my own. And I do best from learning from other people, networking, YouTube videos, podcasts.
Yeah.
But in terms of PT school, at least in my program, from my experience, there was zero education around finances. And it wasn't like this black and white, you show up to orientation and they're like, this is what it costs. They actually, I think my program had gotten in trouble for not having that available on the website. That is now available, just kind of the breakdown. But when I showed up to PT school, I roughly knew like an estimated number of what it was going to cost. What I didn't take into consideration was the area that I'm living in. I went from the South to living in Northern New England. That was a massive jump. I didn't take into consideration really cost of living in the area. I didn't take into consideration how this loan was going to impact me, not just 1 to 2 to 5 years out of physical therapy school, how it's going to impact the decisions that I make, such as buying a house, getting married. When do kids come in the picture? You're not thinking, I definitely wasn't thinking about those things when I pulled out that loan at 21 years old. And I still like going through, the everyday life as a physical therapy student, that number just kept growing and growing and growing. And I was like, I didn't know it was going to be this much. I didn't. And
I think most people don't, it's like, it's almost like an imaginary number. I mean, I've sat down with PTs and I've seen as low as I don't have any loans, or I paid them off, fairly quickly, or I've seen also $380,000 of debt, which is more than most doctors I meet with. Not that it's not they're not a doctor, but surgeons I'm talking about, didn't have that much. And I was almost appalled. I was like, wow, like that's a lot of, debt that they probably didn't understand. It's almost like an imaginary number. You don't log in when you're in school and look at your debt piling up. It's like, I'm just not going to watch it. And then I'll deal with it when I deal with it. Did you feel that kind of way? Like, something down the line, like I don't have to deal with it now. I just want to learn and go to school and do this.
I showed up a little nervous, like ready to have that conversation with my peers. And I got a lot of like, oh, everyone takes out loans. It was very normalized. And I didn't take out any loans for undergrad. I was working full time. I was paying for my undergraduate degree. I had some scholarships. So I show up and I almost was like lying to myself. I was saying, well, I didn't pull out any loans for undergrad. Everyone pulls out loans for PT school. It's going to be okay. And my peers were saying, oh, worry about it later. Get through school, worry about it later. That was just kind of, again, it was a very taboo topic. Even professors did not want to have the conversation around money. I actually heard from a professor, like, that is not our space. We cannot speak on finances at all. I had even early on, I would say second semester, made a comment of, well, when I graduate, I hope to be making X amount of dollars. This is a doctorate degree. And I was having this conversation with a peer, and a professor kind of came in and was like, hey, you, one, shouldn't expect that amount as a graduate student. And two, I wouldn't really talk about money. You should really expect something that it was like $20,000 less than I was kind of hoping for. And that's when I was like, I know I didn't get into this for money. I got into this because I'm passionate and I want to help people. And I love the idea of being a PT. It still is my dream. It doesn't make sense, right? So it's really disheartening because, again, it's this very like hush hush thing that no one really talks about money. And for a program, I have seen some programs, they'll put in like one course about finances. It's going to really depend on the program. What I've seen happen is usually like one person in the program will outsource and talk to a financial advisor and invite a financial advisor to speak to the physical therapy, to speak to their cohort, essentially, which I think is so awesome. You have to network. You should know ignorance is not bliss. It really, really isn't. And that is just something that I find in the physical therapy profession. Not only are people not talking about, the money, people aren't talking about the debt. They're not talking about the return of investment on physical therapy school.
And that's that should be talked about. You know what I mean? Like that's when I sit down and we have a conversation, that's usually the biggest pain point for newer PTs. You know, if you're talking to someone in their late 30s or 40s, you know, I'd say 50-50, have them paid off, and some are near the end of it. You know, so that the other thing I'll say is it's not achievable. You know, there is a
Right.
way, but there is
110%.
it's definitely going to be strict. And this is kind of the other way I want to go with this is, you know, while you're in the medical sales and pharmaceutical sales role, like what would you say is the biggest or the best thing that PT school gave you that you're now using in this role now? And I think you mentioned it before, but I want to kind of see what your thoughts are on this and
Yeah.
what you have to say.
Yeah. So, what I want to say to anyone who is maybe considering transitioning out of physical therapy, PTs are so valuable. Your skills are valuable in many, many settings. Whether it is that non clinical role, maybe you go into a leadership role, maybe you get into tech sales, maybe you go into medical sales, whatever it is, so many things. You do have a quota in physical therapy. It's actually called productivity. You have to see X amount of patients, documentation, all of the things, hoping that X amount of patients get approved, insurance reimbursements, right? That's a transferable skill. Being able to talk to people, being able to educate people, being able to add value to a patient's life. You can add value to a colleague's life, to a client's life. All of those skills are transferable. So, physical therapy school, what it really did, the positives from it, it gave me the confidence when I was working with patients or when I was role playing and kind of working through those clinical cases. It gave me the confidence to be able to maneuver, right? So many different things pop up to where,
Yeah.
like, okay, this wasn't going the way that I thought it was going, but let's try this. Being able to really go back and forth between things. Communication is huge, adding value, really seeing where you fit in. And I'll tell you, I'm really thriving in this space. I love it. This space isn't for everyone. It's going to depend on really who you are as a person. But I just want to stress that for anyone who's gone through physical therapy school and maybe you're licensed in your 2 to 5 years, I'm not saying that PT is bad. It has to make sense. Maybe you don't have any loans from PT school. Maybe you were able to get the degree
Yeah.
for in-state tuition at a very low price that made sense. But for other people considering different things, it's not the end of the world. You can absolutely flourish in a different space, in a non-clinical space.
Yeah. And I think that's so transferable. Um, you know, sorry, someone walked in, but you know, like the sales side of things it's very personable. You know, you have to be able to communicate with people, you have to be able to explain things to people, educate them. And PTs know that. It's almost like they feel like stuck, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. You know, like I
Yeah.
went to school, I got this degree, I have to do this. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And that's not always the case. And I think that there's value in maybe trying something else. I mean, I guess this kind of asks, you know, would you ever, if you had obviously finished the degree, you know, have you seen or do you know of any PTs that have left, maybe done medical sales for a little bit of time, but then went back in and maybe started their own business, or
Yeah.
PT practice? I don't know if you know anyone like that. Would that be something where, if we're hypothetically speaking here, you had the degree and went back and did that, would that be something you would do? You know, if financially it made sense, obviously.
Yeah, let's say that I went ahead and finished school and I was licensed. I think what I would have done is I maybe would keep my license and I would practice for a few hours a week, maybe on the side on the weekends, or do as needed basis, maybe on like a Wednesday night. I personally don't know anyone who left the profession, worked in a different space for a few years and went back. I'm sure there are people out there. I just personally don't know any.
Mhm.
What I can say is I do have a colleague who is a PT working in the medical sales space, and he just keeps his license up. He keeps it up to date.
Okay.
He works on the weekends, but at the moment, I don't think he has any plans of going full time back into that PT space. He loves the medical sales space. He's doing durable medical equipment. So he's just staying there, but then he still gets his passion for PT in, kind of just something on the side extra.
Okay.
And like you said earlier in our conversation, you never know where the profession is headed. I can tell you that every year I see, especially since I've left physical therapy school, I see reimbursement rates going down.
Yeah.
You know, Medicare, Medicaid, another reduction, 4%. They're not paying PTs. And that makes me so angry because as a whole, the profession deserves more. Like I
Yeah.
said, it can be a very rewarding career. It's going to be it depends situation. Are you working for a big PT clinic? Are you working cash base? Is it direct care? Are you starting your own business? You know, there are so many variables in this space. So
Yeah.
I'm never going to say that it's not a profitable and, you know, great way to pursue a career. It's really going to depend.
Yeah, there's definitely a polling in the industry of, you get into PT, you want to help people, and then you become an owner and you want to hire good PTs, but then it's like, well, I'm not getting reimbursed for the things that I'm doing. Do I go cash based? Do I not? There's always these conversations that I'm involved in as well, talking
Right.
to owners, talking to people like yourself who've transitioned out of the industry or people that are still in the industry, helping and coaching PT clinic owners.
Right.
And the last thing I wanted to touch on was, you know, putting yourself in Gianna's shoes, maybe what is it, 6 years ago, when you're entering, maybe leaving high school, in undergrad, thinking about it, what would you have, one thing that you wish you knew going into your graduate degree that maybe would have, I don't know if it helped you stick it out because I know your situation was unique, but for anyone who's thinking like, is this for me? Like, is it worth it? Should I do it? Like maybe kind of a thing that you maybe if you knew would have said, yeah, it is. Like I should stick this out. If there was one thing that you could have known hindsight, what would that be?
Yeah. So my best advice to anyone is that time heals and time really tells. So for me, I had just been hearing, oh, physical therapy school might take a few rounds to get into. I went pedal to the metal, like, let me just go through all of this as quickly as I can. I skipped 2 years of undergrad. I was able to knock out courses while I was in high school. My best advice would be to take a year and see how you feel. Because if I had taken a year off, let's say between undergrad and graduate school, or even before, I know there's benefit to taking a year off after high school and just kind of, if you don't really know what you want to do yet, take the year, go and live your life, go learn
Yeah.
about yourself. You are going to be a very different person after that year. See if you're still feeling the same way. If it's for you, you're going to be like, yeah, I still really want this. I still really want to pursue this. I don't know. Had I taken a year off between undergrad and grad school, I was just so eager to get in. I applied to like 10 schools. I got into a majority of them and I was like, perfect. I don't have to wait until the next cycle. Let me just get in right now in the midst of COVID. I do kind of wonder, how would things be different if I'd maybe taken a year in between that time? Maybe in that year, I would have become more educated and aware of my finances. And maybe I would have said, this doesn't really make sense for me. Or maybe I would have gone to a different school. Maybe I didn't get into one of the schools that was at a lower cost. And I said, yes, I have the opportunity to go to these other schools that are going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, but maybe I wait a year and reapply and go to a school where it just makes more sense. It's in-state tuition, right?
Yeah.
So my best advice for people is honestly, chill out. Take
Yeah, that's good advice for a lot of
don't
people, I think,
don't
regardless of the industry.
yeah, don't be in a rush. And also, if there's one thing, you are not going to learn how to run a business in physical therapy school. You are not going to get all of the education that you need surrounding your finances. It's not just about what you're taking out during those 2 to 3 years. It's really how that impacts you 5 to 10 to 15 to 25 years after the fact. Does that make sense for you? Do you want to have kids? Do you want to have a family? You need to start asking yourself those things, because had I asked myself some of those questions before, I think I would have had a very different approach to graduate school in general.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, like it's almost like it's this marathon of, but marathon, but a sprint at the same time of you got to get to undergrad quick and then you got to get into
Yeah.
graduate school and then maybe try to get out of graduate school as soon as possible because most PTs, they're graduating with that doctorate at 26, 27 years old. And they're like, I have friends that have been working for 4 years and all I've been doing is learning and taking on debt. I haven't even earned a paycheck. And that first paycheck, they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. But then it's like, wait, I gotta pay the piper.
Yeah.
So
It's
like
almost
you
like
said,
when you're in school, you just don't think about it. You're like, I will deal with it when I graduate. Well, you're
yeah,
also dealing with a lot of other things when you graduate. You're a new grad. You want to go somewhere, you want to build confidence. You're already essentially, challenged with, I'm a new grad PT. Like, how am I going to make myself valuable my first year out, right? How am I going to win over clients and find a good mentor? There's a lot of things going on. So the better that you prepare, and you don't just learn how to budget overnight, right? So
yeah.
that's maybe another thing I would say is break it down. Ignorance is not bliss. Put all of the numbers on paper and budget through physical therapy school, because if you can't budget off of $1,000 or $2,000 a month, you're sure as heck not going to be able to budget when you're making $5, $6, $7,000 a month, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do it. So ignorance is not bliss.
That's the line of the day. Ignorance is not bliss. It's true, but you don't know what you don't know a lot of times. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes for someone who gets hurt and has to go see a PT. That's why you go see a PT. It's like, sure,
Absolutely.
could you try to rehab it yourself? Maybe.
Go see.
Will it go well? Probably not. I tore my ACL back playing college soccer. I needed a PT, I needed a surgeon, I couldn't have done it alone. Same thing goes for, that's why I got into this space as well, because I know, it's not talked about a lot. It is taboo. I like to make it less taboo, help
That's
them,
awesome.
I'm here to help you with what you may not know and put you in a better position because of it. And obviously that's how we connected through LinkedIn. I think it's a great, place for PTs to also just network on and get to know people.
Absolutely.
I connect with so many people in your position saying like they have PT, DPT in their bio,
Yeah.
but they're in a sales role or tech sales or they're doing something completely different. But they're still so passionate that they have that degree. And I think it's a good thing for people to kind of network. We'd never be speaking without that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I will say this. I probably talk to two people every single day. A lot of people that I talk to, they are PTs asking me how to transition out or how do they deal with burnout. I experienced burnout in physical therapy school, so
yeah.
it is a little bit different than them being in the field. But I actually was speaking with a classmate that I went to school with last night. She's licensed, she's graduated, she's loving it, she's doing awesome. And she was like, oh, I don't even have a LinkedIn. And I'm like, you should have a LinkedIn. You should be networking at all
Yeah.
point in times, whether you're staying in PT or not. I think it's just a good tool. It's a good tool to have.
No, it is. Your network is your net worth, as I like to say a lot. It's so true. But well, thank you for coming on and talking with me. This was great. I hope people get, especially younger PTs that are graduating or have graduated, get value out of hearing this. There's always opportunity out there to reinvent yourself
Always.
and do other things, and you're a living, breathing example of that. So I'm glad we could talk. If anyone wants to reach out to you, you know, to talk about the non-clinical role you went into, about your experience in more detail, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so the best way for someone to do that is obviously go to my LinkedIn page. My email information is actually in my banner and
Okay.
shoot me a message. I will say I am extremely busy. I just started a new role, but I do try my absolute best to get back to people. I love talking to people, I love networking. And I think that if someone has the courage to message you and find out about your story or just ask a question, that's like step one. Who you talk to is huge, as
Yeah.
you know, and I know networking
Yep.
is everything.
So
So
important.
don't be afraid to just shoot a message. I will try to get back to you, but I make no promises because I have a pretty big territory. I'm a pretty busy woman these days.
Well, it's good. You should be busy. That means you're doing well. So keep that up. But and I think that's how we connected. We just shot each other a message, and
Yep.
here we are now. So it does work. But Gianna, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you, get to know you better, and we'll
Yeah.
definitely
Thank you
keep
so
in
much for
touch.
having me.
Yeah, of
Awesome.
course.
Thank you.